In the heart of the Roman Empire, a powerful senator, faced with a wife whose spirit he could not break, conceives of a punishment born of pure rage and desperation. He commissions a device of curved wood and iron, not to kill her, but to publicly display her submission. He wants to create a symbol of his dominance, but instead, he forges a legend. Now, it's important to say right up front, this is not a story you will find in any ancient history book. The device, the senator, and his wife are all part of a modern tale, a piece of folklore created for our time. But just because the story isn't historically true doesn't mean it can't reveal a deeper truth about the world it's meant to represent, and the very real horrors of the past. To understand where a story like this even comes from, we have to understand the world it's set in. Ancient Rome, a civilization of incredible engineering, philosophy, and law. But under the marble surface of its grand forums and aqueducts lay a brutal social structure. At its core was the principle of patria potestas, the power of the father. This law gave the paterfamilias, the oldest living male in a household, almost absolute power over his family. He controlled his children, his slaves, and his wife. He could arrange their marriages, sell them into slavery, and in the early days of Rome, he even held the power of life and death over them. For Roman women, this was a harsh reality. Legally, a woman was often like a child, always under the guardianship of a man, first her father, and then usually her husband. Now, upper-class women could and did wield a lot of influence behind the scenes, but their official status was one of submission. Their worth was tied to their role as wives and mothers, producers of heirs to carry on the family name. The ideal Roman wife, the domiceda, was one who stayed home, was modest, and above all, obedient. Disobedience, especially adultery, wasn't just a personal matter, it was seen as an attack on the entire patriarchal order. Laws like the Lex Julia, brought in by Emperor Augustus, made a wife's adultery a public crime. A guilty woman could be exiled and lose a huge chunk of her property. And while a husband's affairs with slaves or prostitutes were mostly shrugged off, a wife's infidelity was a stain on the family's honor that had to be dealt with, and severely. It's from this world of rigid control and fierce patriarchy that the modern story of the disciplinary of Etruria, or the Viturian discipline, emerges. This tale doesn't exist in the grand histories of Tacitus or Livy. It's a piece of fiction that tells a profound truth about the Roman psyche, the obsession with control, the brutal punishment of defiance, and the endless appetite for spectacle. This isn't just the story of a device, it's the story of a society that was real enough to make us believe it could have been invented. The story centers on two fictional characters from the heart of Roman high society, Senator Marcus Veturius and his wife, Julia Veturia. In the tale, Marcus is a man carved from Roman tradition itself. He's rich, powerful, and a firm believer in the old ways. He sees the world as a ladder created by the gods, with himself, a Roman senator and paterfamilias, sitting comfortably near the top. In his mind, his authority was absolute. Period. Julia, of course, is his total opposite. Born into a noble family, she's known for her sharp mind, her cutting wit, and a spirit that just refuses to be tamed. In a society that wanted women to be quiet and agreeable, Julia was a thunderstorm. She'd debate philosophy with her husband's guests, question his political moves, and walk through the city with a freedom that many found shocking. She wasn't unfaithful in the legal sense, but in her husband's eyes, she was guilty of a much worse crime: she was disobedient. Her very existence was a daily challenge to his power. The story goes that he tried everything the Roman system allowed. Public warnings, private threats, social isolation. He banned her from banquets and cut off her access to her own money. But nothing worked. Being shamed didn't humble her, it just sharpened her tongue. Being isolated didn't break her, it seemed to make her even stronger. For Senator Veturius, a man whose power was known across the empire, this private failure was an unbearable blow to his pride. He could command armies and sway the Senate, but he couldn't command his own wife. Consumed by rage, the legend says Marcus dreamed up a new kind of punishment. It couldn't be death. Killing a high-born woman for simple disobedience would cause a political scandal. It had to be something else. Something that would crush her spirit without killing her. He calls a master craftsman, a man who normally builds furniture and chariots, and gives him chillingly specific instructions. He wants a device not of pain, but of posture. An instrument not of death, but of unending, agonizing submission. The result was what would become known as the disciplinary of Etruria, or more simply, the cradle. This first version was made of hardened oak. It was a gracefully curved wooden frame, almost like a crescent moon, built to hold a human body in a state of extreme discomfort. Anyone forced into it would be bent backward, their spine arched at an unnatural angle, with their arms and legs tied down. The goal wasn't to tear muscles or snap bones. It was designed to create a constant, excruciating strain that would get worse with every passing hour. There was no escape, no way to shift your weight to get a moment of relief. It was the posture of total surrender. Marcus Veturius has the device installed in the atrium of his massive villa, the public heart of a Roman home where guests and clients were always coming and going. His plan was simple and cruel. Every day, for hours at a time, he'd have Julia locked into the cradle. Her public humiliation would be his private victory. His allies, his rivals, they would all walk through the atrium and see the famously defiant Julia Veturia, finally broken and bent to her husband's will. He thought he was creating a living statue of obedience, a monument to his absolute power. But the senator was about to learn that you can cage a person, but you can't cage their will. The first time Julia was forced into the cradle, it was a private event. The household slaves, under the senator's cold gaze, strapped her into the curved wooden frame. The immediate shock of the position, the unnatural arch of her back, the tightening of every single muscle, was immense. The senator stood before her, a smug look of victory on his face, waiting for the tears, the begging, the final surrender. They never came. Julia, her body twisted and screaming in silent agony, just locked her eyes on her husband. Her expression wasn't one of pain or fear. It was pure, ice-cold contempt. She didn't say a word. She refused to give him the satisfaction of a single cry. For hours she stayed there, a silent statue of defiance. When visitors passed through the atrium, they saw the senator's wife in the bizarre machine. They'd look away, whispering to each other. They saw the cruelty, but they also saw the unbroken woman at the center of it. The message he wanted to send was already getting twisted. Word of the senator's strange and cruel punishment started to spread through the gossip-filled streets of Rome. It was a dark curiosity. A powerful man so unable to control his own wife that he had to invent a machine to do it for him. The story wasn't about Marcus's strength, but about Julia's incredible spirit. Soon, people started making up excuses to visit the Veturius villa, hoping to get a look at the infamous cradle and the woman who was enduring it. Sensing he was losing control of the story, Marcus made a fateful mistake. He doubled down. He had the craftsman build a second cradle, this time from cold, unforgiving iron. And he moved the whole show outdoors. He had a platform built in his gardens, right where it could be seen from a public road. He wanted to dial up the shame, to make the humiliation so complete that Julia would have no choice but to break. It did the exact opposite. The private shame was now a public spectacle, and the public was fascinated. What started as a few curious people became a crowd. Street vendors showed up selling wine and snacks. The punishment of Julia Vittoria was turning into a daily event, a piece of street theater. Rome, a city built on spectacle, had found a brand new show. The same society that packed the Colosseum to watch gladiators fight to the death now gathered to watch the silent, psychological war between a senator and his wife. This wasn't the bloody entertainment of the arena. This was something different. It was a live drama about power, resistance, and endurance. The crowd would watch, captivated, for hours. They watched as Julia's body trembled from the strain. They watched the sweat on her forehead. And they watched her refuse to break. Then, one day, something amazing happened. As she was locked in the cradle, her body in agony, a few people in the crowd started heckling. But they weren't jeering at her, they were jeering at the senator, who was watching from his porch. They mocked him for being unable to command his own wife's respect. Julia, hearing this, did the one thing nobody expected. She laughed. It started as a weak, pained chuckle, but it grew into a full, clear laugh that rang out across the garden. That laugh completely shattered the senator's illusion of power. It was the sound of pure defiance. She was in his machine, totally at his mercy, and yet she was mocking him. She was turning his instrument of torture into her stage. From that day on, everything changed. The crowd started cheering for Julia. They threw flowers. They shouted words of encouragement. Her daily punishment had become her performance, and she was the star. She had transformed a symbol of her oppression into a symbol of her rebellion. The cradle was no longer just a torture device, it was entertainment. The fictional tale of Julia Vittoria doesn't end there. The story goes that Senator Vittorius, totally defeated and a joke in Rome, retired from public life in disgrace. The cradle itself, the iron symbol of his failure, was dismantled. But the idea of it proved much harder to kill. This is where the modern story gets really interesting, because it starts to rhyme with real history. While the Roman cradle is a myth, there was a very real device that appeared centuries later in medieval Europe, known as the scolds bridle or branks. It was an iron cage that enclosed the head, with a metal plate or spike that was forced into the mouth to hold down the tongue, making speech impossible. First recorded in Scotland in the 16th century, the scold's bridle was a punishment used almost exclusively on women. Women who were called nags, gossips, or scolds, in other words, women whose speech was considered a problem or a challenge to male authority, would be locked into the bridle and paraded through town as a public humiliation. To be perfectly clear, there is no direct historical line connecting the fictional Roman cradle to the real scold's bridle. They are separated by over 1,000 years and have no direct link. And yet, the spiritual connection is undeniable. Both were born from the same terrifying impulse, the need to control a defiant woman. The cradle aimed to break the will by breaking the body's posture, the bridle aimed to break the will by silencing the voice. Both turned punishment into a public show, making a woman's suffering a warning to others. As the Roman Empire faded and Christianity rose, the over-the-top, spectacular cruelty of the arena began to change. Public punishments became less about gruesome entertainment and more about delivering solemn, moral warnings. The idea of the cradle, a product of a very specific Roman obsession with spectacle, didn't really have a place anymore. And so the fictional device vanished, but the story survived as a modern legend. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even when faced with absolute power and instruments of cruelty, the human spirit, and a woman's will, can't be so easily broken. The legend of Julia Vittoria is a testament to the fact that stories, even when they're not literally true, can carry a deeper, more profound truth within them. Stories like this one, both the real and the imagined, are what we are passionate about bringing to light. They show us that the past is more complex, more brutal, and far more interesting than we were ever taught in school. If you love digging into these hidden corners of history, and the powerful stories we tell about it, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. So, is the story of the disciplinary of Etruria real? No. There is zero archaeological or historical proof of this specific device or the people in the story. It's a modern invention. But its legend is powerful because it taps into so many real truths about the Roman world. It reflects the absolute power of the paterfamilias and the rigid, patriarchal structure that governed Roman society. It also embodies the Roman obsession with public spectacle, where punishment and entertainment were often the exact same thing, a grim reality we see in the bloody sands of the Colosseum. But more than anything, the legend of the cradle is a story of resistance. It's a narrative about how an instrument of total control can be turned upside down. Julia of Etruria, whether a real woman or a symbol, represents the enduring power of the human will to defy oppression. Her laughter while being tortured is the critical turning point. It transforms her from a victim into a victor. It robs her tormentor of his power because she refuses to validate his authority with her suffering. This story forces us to look past the emperors and legions and into the homes and gardens of Rome, where silent wars were fought every single day. In the end, it almost doesn't matter if a senator named Marcus Veturius ever actually built an iron cradle to break his wife. The story exists because the world that could inspire it was real. The subjugation was real. The cruelty was real. And, we have to believe, the defiance was real, too.